Way late, ridiculously late. Restream was not functioning early this morning, and at least now we've got a nice clear signal connection from Restream's end. Not apparently to do with my internet. It has to do with their thing. Perhaps everyone in the world was doing, whoops, sorry about that. Perhaps everyone in the world was doing videos yesterday. I don't know. At any rate, we'll do the show that we were going to do yesterday, or rather earlier this morning, and that means better late than never. It's, as you know, continuing the delightful process of slamming through Titans, the creationist book, which is purporting to deal with dinosaurs on a reasonably good level. No. And we're finding that out source by source as I go through all the material. Our next little bunch, I'm bringing up a show and tell. Isn't that sweet? Little Dilophosaurus, isn't it just precious? Yes. Notice the little cute little ridges up there on the top. These are very mysterious. For those of you who don't know about Dilophosaurus, it's one of the early predators in the early Jurassic, when the relatively small coelophysid-sized critters, Herrerasaurs and all of that, are getting much bigger. And this is the big kid on the block at the time. Those crests are very funky because they're not entirely sure what they're for. They seem kind of fragile, so they don't seem to be the kind of thing you would have for like head butting. They might have had a thermoregulatory function. They might very probably have been a sexual display. They are kind of rare. There isn't really other ones. There's occasional hornish stuff and stuff that sticks up in various theropods, but something quite like this weird Dilophosaurus crest is very eccentric, and there's not a huge number of fossils on them and so forth and so on. At any rate, it comes up in Sarfati and Tay because they're discussing the issue of its predation and health issues, because there was a 2016 paper from PLOS from Center, which the creationists are citing, that clearly indicated that it, quote, the creationist saying this, doesn't look like life in a very good creation, Genesis 1:3:1, so the maladies must have occurred after the fall. So this is part of that creationist evolutionary process where the old doctrinal positions of the Duane Gish era, where the carnivory is occurring only after, hello, yes, you're a historian, just say the Dilophosaur crest are ritualistic. Yes, it's a feature or affect, some other utterly meaningless kind of phrase that's going on there. At any rate, this is Sarfati and Tay represent the evolving process whereby that old creationist position that I grew up with in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where carnivory is occurring after the flood, is pretty much being swept to the side. And the newer breed of paleontologically minded creationists, Todd Wood and all these various others, are just throwing in the towel. No, there was way too much evidence that critters are eating critters in the fossil record, and therefore those are getting preserved in the flood, and therefore carnivory had to have occurred prior to the flood. Sometimes, of course, still after the fall. Apple eating in the Garden of Eden causes critters everywhere on the planet to start going after each other and evolving carnivorous features out of their herbivorous original environment. I mean, this is a mess. But anyway, that's not really the reason why I'm bringing all of this Dilophosaurus material up, because it's even much more interesting than this. There's also a little side wrinkle, which in the Center paper in particular, which of course they must have known about, it's that the Dilophosaurus is depicted in their little cladogram and the little illustration as feathered. And that, in fact, they don't bring this up. They may allude to it later in their section where they're trying to distance birds from dinosaurs. We'll find out later. But at the very least, on this point, Sarfati and Tay are not alluding to whether or not Dilophosaurus has any feather integuments or not. Now, no one's ever found a Dilophosaurus directly with that, but its close cousins have some trace material that suggests there were feathers. So phylogenetically, it's not at all implausible. And I'll be putting a post up to a 2004 paper by Kondrat, which kind of reviews the evidence for feathered theropods and that, and then of which the Dilophosaurus pops up along the way. And then the critics are more uncertain about this because some of this stuff involves the connection of feather impressions with footprints issues, and that again puts up how many Dilophosauruses are represented by footprints rather than just an actual skeleton. So there's a 2003 paper from Lockley that reflects that position. And then a post from Darren Naish, who, by the way, this is partly a homage to Darren Naish, because if there's anybody that collects model dinosaurs and critters on a scale that dwarfs anything I could attempt, it would be Darren Naish. My heavens, he posts stuff on Twitter where he shows, oh, I found a new Styracosaurus, you know, and I think he needs to open up a bloody museum, because he's got just display case after display case of critters. So he's pathological in that respect. I am but a lowly amateur who have little representations of the various taxa to the best that I can do. And I, in future years, when I got better finances, I'll probably wade into that, because there's an awful lot of little sidebar critters that are on varying scales that are available now that weren't before. But I got a good representative for anybody that's visited in my basement and see my dinosaur collection from various ones, the Carnegie collection and the Batat and various others. It gets a pretty good reflection of the diversity of dinosaur type. But of course, they're constantly coming up with new dinosaurs, which brings us back to the whole point of why this interesting bit about the Dilophosaurus is kind of funky. Because, as you know, we're going to be having a big section on the Ark Encounters kind list. And it all boils down to how many kinds they got on board and how many dinosaur kinds are there. And for all practical purposes, the creationists are running off of family levels with a few wacky exceptions. And of course, our species has to be its own special kind and blah, blah, blah. It's the same routine. But Sarfati and Tay are kind of coming in that there's the Dilophosaurid kind. So the Dilophosauridae family is itself a created kind. And that's based on the pegging of it in older systematics, I guess, because they aren't offering any source citation on it. Remember, the center paper is the only one that's coming up regarding the Dilophosaurus. And it's not really a thing on systematics. It's about a different issue about this particular specimen being in such terrible condition with signs of healing injuries and that apparently healed. And so this thing was poor clunking around, and then finally it dies in a relatively modest little local flood. And that's the end of that poor little critter. But a 2020 paper by Marsh and Rowe, which therefore is earlier than Sarfati and Tay, and I'll be putting a link up to that, puts it as a stem Averostrand, which is a term I had not heard before, which gives an indication that what we've got is a new wrinkle to the systematics that's arising because more fossils are being discovered. If you think about how any systematics runs, is X a relative of Y? Well, everything is related to everything in an evolutionary context, but is it a close relative of Y? Well, if all you've got is X and Y, and they have more characteristics than Z and A, then naturally they can be grouped together. But as you discover a W and a Z and an R that fills in the bit, for example, like this material here, you start getting more precise analysis. And this is another paper I'll be putting up a link to, which is from 2019, also, therefore, predating the Sarfati and Tay book, on a clade about the Averostrans, a Triassic Averostrand line theropod from Switzerland in the early evolution of dinosaurs. So this is showing how the movement is going on, that it's not looking like Dilophosaurids are a separate family, that all you've got is with a particular variety of this bunch that's grouped in with the basal groups from which Allosaurus and other ones work off of, just happens to have these little funky little crests. So that means there may not be a Dilophosaurid family. Does this mean that had the Ark Encounter come along later, or if Sarfati and Tay had come along later, they would be reclassifying the Dilophosaurs in a different kind because the evolutionary systematics has clarified it. Which brings us back to the delightful issue. Aren't they simply parroting the standard systematics? They're not doing anything. None of this, of their decisions as to what is or is not a kind, is based on their own independent research. It's based on them cribbing the stuff from the general systematics. Parasites. Very, very pathetic. Now, part 2 of the show relates to a unexpected little bit that popped up, and it keeps on popping up almost like a bad penny in the intelligent design movement, and that relates to the carnivorous plants. And there was a post just last February, I'll be putting a link up to that, of course, from dear Jonathan McLatchie, Carnivory in Plants. And this proved to be kind of really funky because it was an insight into just how superficial some of the analyses are and how parasitically repetitive the anti-evolutionists can be. I grab the right mouse here to move my screen. I have the laptop that I'm on, and then I have my reference notes that are on my regular PC screens behind me, and I have the little mouse, wireless mouse for my laptop right next to the mouse for the keyboard, which is pushed over to one side because I've got this stuck in the middle between the two. And so isn't it pathetic? The old fart is trying to make the best out of the technology, and well, too bad. I'm doing the best I can, kids. At any rate, check out that little Averostrans term, because it's a new grouping that we'll find out as the systematics proceeds about whether or not that ends up. It's a moment is just referred to as a clade, and so they're relating all the material together, and it's a funky little area that we'll then be also seeing whether or not the creationists follow up on. But back to McLatchie. It's one of the little tropes of intelligent design, and to some extent young earth creationism, because they've done an occasional post on carnivorous plants too, that somehow this is a problem for evolution, which is how McLatchie puts it. And what exactly does that consist of? Well, it's not a huge article, and it's got stuff on adhesive type strap and slipperiness and the Venus flytrap and the corkscrew plant. You know, it goes on for a few pages, but it turns out it has exactly one source, which is an old 2007 chapter from the Handbook of Plant Science by Wolf Eckhard Lünig and Heinz Albert Becker. And Eckhard Lünig is a intelligent design groupie. And alas, I can't put a link up to their material. I've been able to look at the stuff on it, but I was able to track down that it contained really old sources. So it has some authority quoted blips from the 1950s and the 1980s. And fortunately, our little pal is actually citing from some of this stuff. So we get to see it direct in the McLatchie post. So it's got Juniper et al., which turns out to be a 1989 book, which at the time was a perfectly major book, but not quite so now. And then there is another quote that McLatchie puts out from Lünig, which is from this Slack 2001, which turns out when I was tracking it down on archive.org is actually from 1980. It's an old general book. The Internet Archive has a view-only copy, so you can zip into it if you wish. And stuff is really going back really far, even in the 2007 posting. So it was dated at the time. And yipes, that's antiquated, trying to do something in 2024, I would think. And so what we've got is the issue of what's happened since. And so research didn't stop in 1989, didn't stop in 2001, it didn't stop in 2007, and it's still going on today. So a few on this issue of making sense of the carnivorous plants. There's a article from 2015 from PNAS by Schertzer. There's another one from 2020 from in Cell by Palfalvi et al. And a very detailed review of the state of the art from 2021 by Hedrick and Fukushima. And then I'll just toss in a 2022 general post from the Atlantic, kind of summarizing a lot of this recent work and how it's making sense of how carnivorous systems develop and what the features are in the plants that are getting co-opted as carnivory and what enzymes and biological systems are involved. So other than pot-shotting it from the sideline, intelligent design ain't doing a damn thing here. And McLatchie, coming along in 2024, all he can think to do is just to retread stuff that was presumably on his little file, as if it was cutting edge research and as if it was relevant for where the actual research is, which none of their people do. And so this sort of stuff occurs absolutely ubiquitously in the secondary parasite literature. We'll be finding a lot of that. I'm just plugging in some material. I had to pick up some new ink for the printer so that I could get caught up with the March backlog of stuff, which includes the big fracas that took place between Gunter Beckley lambasting a panoply of people who brought up the issue of human evolution and the intelligent design, bad positions on it and the like. And this involves Aaron Ra, it involves Erica Gutsick Gibbon, it involves Dapper Dinosaur, it involves Jackson Wheat, co-author of my book over there. And so it's an interesting bit that I've been covering up on, covering the material about the backlogs and what sources are involved and making sure that I've got all the primary material that's being alluded to, which is basically stuff being brought up, not so much by Beckley, but by the various people I just mentioned in criticism of Beckley. So I've been going through a lot of that material. Yes, and they're deplorable ilk, yes. It even delves into some little sidebar areas. There's a particular guy that likes to history for atheists, and it's vague as to whether or not he's a believer or not, and he's a snarky, scholarly, but somewhat annoying fellow who lit into Aaron Ra a little bit ago about a talk that he was having with somebody over the history of religion and the role of religion in a debate. And this gets sucked up by Gunter Beckley. So I wasn't aware of this little sidebar until Beckley decided to wave it as part of the character assassination of how incompetent Aaron Ra supposedly is. On systematics, not so incompetent, but maybe on the ins and outs of who was a monk or not back in the Middle Ages, Tim has a partial point. This will be stuff that I'll probably allude to in a reference note because it's useful enough, and then it can be, we'll be probably exploring it at more length in the projected book on the evolution and origin of religion, and that, which is really kind of funky big. Tim O'Neill is somebody who has tremendous blind spots, and he just doesn't like to think about, he's in discussing Giordano Bruno and his being burned at the stake by the church. He was not a scientist, and he wasn't being burned for believing that any cosmological things. It was for the heretical position and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting back there and going, excuse me, Tim, but the church should never have the power to burn anybody at the stake for any reason, scientific or theological. And that doesn't seem to settle into that kind of apologetic worldview. And also he had popped up in my research notes in a completely different context in relation to the issue about what scientific discoveries Hypatia had done back in the early Christian period, and the fact that she was bumped off by a mob of angry Christians infuriated with not enough piety and not liking the pagans anymore now that they were officially the religion of the state and all that stuff. And he is just as wishy-washy and squiggly-wibbly on that issue as well. So the upshot is that Tim O'Neill is not an oracle, and Beckley was not really justified in waving him as if he were an oracle to character assassinate Aaron Ra. I mean, I have my own complaints about Aaron Ra. If you're listening, take note. That I think one of his blind spots is he tends not to look at creationists from a source methods direction, which is what material are they relying on and how incestuous they are in their research. And so from Ra's point of view, if Kent Hovind keeps repeating the same claptrap over and over again after Aaron Ra pointed out why it was wrong, well, then the man is just a liar. But me, I'm looking at Canthovian and I'm looking at a Tortugan mind. And so it doesn't matter how many times Aaron Roth brings up a topic, it just bounces off the mind shell and never registers. That's how the mindset works. So that would be my primary criticism of him. And he can be quibbly and wrong on certain little fiddly bits of, because he's not really a church historian. And so he runs a little bit off the cuff in terms of memory. And that's a human foible. I think he needs to tidy up his act in terms of documentation and presentations. I think because a lot of it, I think he runs off of the pattern that he's assembled over the years. And the idea of documenting every little jot and tittle of it, to be careful. If he were to write a book on the subject, I think that would come up. I think of Martin Gardner's delightful admonition that I've taken a great deal to heart, the mathematician guy who wrote for Scientific American for years and all that, wrote the classic Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Sciences way back in the ancient 1950s. Still quite a classic little work. Anyway, he said, you want to know how little you know about a subject, try writing a book about it. Because the moment you then go from writing little short articles to actually trying to do justice to a topic at book level, you realize how much more you need to do. And I think that would be my one piece of advice to Aaron on that. Tim O'Neill, though, strikes me as I can't call him an anti-atheist per se, because we're not entirely sure what his philosophy is, but he sure sounds not exactly an atheist. But at any rate, he's not quite as snarky as Dave Farina. Farina goes ballistic, although as a person, he's perfectly affable, and he tends not to ratchet things up except when he's dealing with people he doesn't like, in which case it gets ratcheted up to 11 on the dial. O'Neill apparently isn't that kind of a temperament, but he is a verbose snarker who kind of takes no prisoners and overplays his hand, I think, in much the same way that any apologist that can get burrowing too much into minutia and you lose track of the big picture issues. So maybe Aaron Rod doesn't deal with the minutia enough, and O'Neill deals with the minutia too much. So that's the kind of little sidebar that's going to be popping up in a little bits of the notes in that and in subsequent work, because all that stuff about the role of the church and state and church in history and whether or not religion has or has not been an impediment to scientific discovery and in what cases, and whether or not ideology plays an impediment independent of religion. Religion is merely a branch of ideological philosophy, gets us to look to bigger picture issues. And all of that's going to be a natural subject matter for the origin and development of evolution and like-minded philosophical systems. So we'll be busy for that, but that's years and years and years down the road. We've still got, I think the next book on the queue after we finish volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, Jackson wants to dive into the conspiracy theory book, which is knee-deep in methodology, because nothing more readily illustrates the problems with a Tortugan mind than conspiracy theories. And so from a methods point of view, you're diving right down into the bit of it. So anyway, there we got a bit of a show in. Anybody got any wonderful questions for me? I see DM in the link. We won't have anybody in the standard mode here because of the fact that I'm coming in way many hours late, but at least it will be on the same day as I had originally planned. It's glad that I've got a proper thing. Oh, and I need to put up my wonderful patrons who support the project, to my puzzlement and delight. And our colleagues, Hendril, Eric, and Cyrus, our researchers, Ian, Convert Me, Stephen, James, History, Pelagia, Ralph, Benjamin, Slava, our assistant researchers, Command, Dorankus, Scott, Christopher, Lavender Lady, Studio DM Wing in the show, Maybe you can put little comments in the live chat there to say why you are a supporter of the channel and why other people should do that as well. And then our friends Bats and Marigale and Unfinished Journey and Nana and Morton and Bo and Alex and Paul, and then all of our various legacy patrons who have come at one point or another and shifted around because times get very, very murky. And it's understandable. I know several people whose finances reached the point where they just had a life to read. Yeah, odds on needing to go to volume 3. Oh, that's a interesting question. I cannot guarantee that we won't have to split volume 2 up. I don't know. It all depends on how big the thing comes in. I was commissioned by Jackson to do the flood geology legends and Noah's Ark stuff and all that for the thing. That has expanded to the point where it's going to actually be 2 big chapters in the book and several appendices that are connected to that. The whole cataloging of the flood legends around the world that aren't quite how the creationists are dealing with it, and the issue of carnivory and diseases in the world and the like, and among organisms. These things expanded from a big info box to the point where I'm going, oh my Lord, this is going to have to be an appendix. So that's bumped downstream. And once we get all the material in, I'm currently working through Jackson's chapter, which he had pegged as chapter 4, but becomes chapter 5 because my chapter splits in 2. On a lot on Steve Meyer's and Gunter Beckley's blather on the Cambrian and Precambrian organisms and systematics there, and stuff on the development of Tiktaalik and how creationists deal with that. There's stuff connecting up with David Minton. He's kind of the main arc of the thing from Answers in Genesis. That one is turning into quite a substantial length chapter in that. So we'll find out how many that goes, and if we can squeak it in under the same page limit with the same size fonts and all that kind of stuff as volume 2, then we'll be okay. I don't know. I'll have to see how everything works out. If worse comes to worse, theoretically we can bump it over and basically split it in the middle, and it all depends on whether or not stuff on human evolution and the paleo worlds and all of that stuff expands, because oh lordy b, I got a lot of neat stuff on the geological and paleontological angle that we will want to be putting in if possible. So we'll see. But at the moment, I'm still operating under the premise that will be a single volume 2. And we'll find out about how that's going. Away we go. The fact that volume 1 was as hefty as it is, it covers an awful lot of stuff. Our chapters are very detailed, and the reference list is very massive. And the same thing goes for this new material, because at the moment, the procedure that I'm doing on his chapter 5 is I'm going through and plugging in, because he doesn't have to worry about pinning down the particular technical citations and that. He'll just be alluding to what their titles are and the authors and the years, and I'm figuring out all of that and getting all the exact references and putting the index together and all that kind of stuff. And then I'll be plugging in the material that I already have in my data field. Beyond that, once I'm done with that process, then there's a big stack of stuff in the basement that relates to those issues, some of which I'm sure I've already hit in the writing that I've done in that chapter draft. But there will be tons of material on some of the little nooks and crannies of things developed in vertebrates and the genetic systems and all that, that because the titles aren't things that are popping up in like text charts that I'm doing in my reference bibliography, I will have forgotten about and not hit on. But I will have them in my stack downstairs. And so that will have to be folded in. We'll see how that all goes as to what material we got in there. But my gosh, there has been such wonderful genetic material. And it's always we're looking at it from a source methods direction. Hi, Brian. I see you're in the thing. Writing all the new stuff, and I want the material to be really up to date, so that anybody hitting the ground with it, presumably early next year, 2025, it seems a fairly safe bet. I think I'd be surprised if we can squeak this out by the end of the year. because we still got a lot of material to deal with. And Jackson has his jobs to do, and he's got his teaching in college and all of that. So, I mean, he has a life, and I am a retiree juggling this, and of course, book 3 in the paralogue cycle. So we all keep our little irons in the fire. But I can guarantee you, if you liked Volume 1, you're going to love Volume 2, because it's whenever you think that maybe creationists have kind of learned their lesson about how to do proper analytical work. No, they haven't. And in addition to the old favorites, we've got new material on Andrew Snelling screwing up. And of course, all this new material on Gunter Beckley. Beckley is such a fascinating character of somebody who has no position at all, but he knows what he's against. We have no clue about if he thinks anything is related to anything. And yet he's certain that it can't be this and it can't be that. The Ark Encounter list, nobody has come together to do a full analysis on it. And I'm not blaming anybody on it, simply because they have not gone out of their way to make it easy to do that. If you look on the Ark Encounter website, you'll find a picture of their little chart that lists all their kinds. At no point can you see the details of it. And they don't have a list. I mean, they could easily put up a PDF or a JPG or something of a high resolution picture, or even better yet, a methodical breakdown in Answers Research Journal of all the kinds they have and documentation for why they did what they did. As far as I know, no one's ever done that. So it's always been a matter of people coming to the Ark and seeing the little chart and maybe writing down some information on it. I finally got a copy with a bit of a lens flare at some parts that made it hard to read certain parts, but that at least got an opportunity to do most of the analysis. And then, bless her heart, Erica did a full court press, because she did a visit and took pictures and worked up her own independent spreadsheet listing all the kinds. So between my listing and her listing, I've been able to cross-reference and finally compile a complete breakdown of the kinds that are listed on that Ark Encounter thing. No one else has done all of that. And that's just step 1, because now it's a matter of working out why the things are listed the way they are, and are there disputes as to whether or not they should be listing them that way, and why are they hair splitting and grouping things as separate kinds or not, or putting certain things together as kinds. Some family things have such diversity within them that it far exceeds the diversity we have amongst the primates, for example. Yes, I'm like Hercule Poirot in Murder on the Orient Express. I wanted somebody else to say that. Yes, they don't want people like me seeing it. Exactly. That the easier it is to see the information that they have, the more it pops up as what the hell interesting is going on. And the thing that jumps out, concept of time would be literal. Oh my gosh, they would, well, you could theoretically assume that they would be treating families as kinds consistently. That's still a hell of a lot of families. And of course, they don't have to worry about all the aquatic ones and the ones they think can survive the flood, and all that. They can wriggle around an awful lot of that. But at least it would be an indication that their brains were thinking about it. But their brains don't think about it. That apart from the apologetics of trying to figure out what's on the Ark, that's kind of where things break down. And at that point, when they bring up organisms at all, it's in the gee whiz mode of see how wonderful and magnificent this is. And intelligent design follows exactly the same thing, like McLatchie and the stupid carnivorous plants. Yes, the bacteria kind, yes. But the thing that jumped out at me right off the bat when I saw the list, it's grouped. There's mammals, and they have it clustered by extinct mammals versus living mammals, and extinct birds versus living birds. So they're aware of that part. And so you can immediately do a calculation. Well, how much of the kinds are extinct? And it turns out 54% of them are, which means that the whole point, if the idea of the Ark was to preserve the kinds because they are to be preserved as precious, it was a manifest failure, because 50%, over half of them went extinct, supposedly, after the flood, by their own account. But That's not what really amuses me. Within each group, you have your extinct mammals, fine and dandy. Why are they listed in the order that they are? It's not alphabetical. Remember, no kind is related to any other kind by definition. So why aren't they in alphabetical order? Why are you clustering certain mammal kinds next to other mammal kinds? Well, the moment you start looking at them in detail, for mammals in especially, because I'll be doing a big breakdown of the mammals in particular, but there will also be aspects in the dinosaurs, but certainly mammals. It's where are they getting their list from? They're getting them from the systematics, the standard evolutionary paleontology. And therefore, they're copying them down in the order that they're listed in the evolutionary systematics, not alphabetically, but phylogenetically. So right in front of you is an arbitrary account of where everything about their work is parasitizing an evolutionary framework that gets invisibilized because they're not acknowledging it. But the very order of the terms they're putting in verifies that they're getting this from the standard systematics. In some cases, I think just no more sophisticated than Wikipedia, plowing along on that. But that puts them into the bollocks, as we saw with Starfatty and Tay, of the fact that they are deriving their arguments from often older systematics, and they don't actually have a model of their own to apply to be able to differentiate controversies. So there's a big chunk of Sarfati and Tay's, I've mentioned this in an earlier episode, a big chunk of their kinds are problematic. They're saying, oh, it could be this kind and it might be that kind. How would you know? Well, apparently baraminology is so absolutely useless that it can't act as a measuring stick here. Duh. So we'll just have to wait for the standard evolutionists to work out how the systematics are for you to copy and then put in a subsequent book. So we'll be coming along on that angle. Overall, Sarfati and Tay are running about 60% of the science sources that they are bringing up. They are skipping past data in them or outright misrepresenting. And they're not bringing up a hell of a lot of science material. Only about a quarter of the references so far in the book have been technical work. The rest of it is general material, or a huge chunk, about half of it is just other CMI creationist apologetics. So we'll find out whether or not that continues to run all the way down as we plow through the sauropods and the ornithischians and all that crowd, and how much double dipping they do of where it's basically the same sources being reused over and over again. We'll find all of that out when we get down to the final end of it. But at any rate, it's setting an interesting benchmark, because even for creationist apologetics, if you look at Jensen, his two books, and Rupin Sanford that we had done over the many, many years of previous analyses, they aren't as extremely high in terms of merely creationist repeating as Sarfati and Tay are. They're very, very off the chart compared to those other ones. So la-di-da, Sarfati and Tay, you're not coming up to the standards of a Jensen or a Sanford and Roop, and that's not exactly a high standard to go by. Anyway, so let me queue up. We're just coming up on 40 minutes here. Let me put up my excessively noisy advert for The Rocks Were There. And pause that little puppy. Yeah, it would be absolutely hilarious to see creationists try to work their way through the arthropods, through the various invertebrates, plants. I mean, the systematics there, I would predict that they would have to do exactly what the Ark Encounter did, which is simply copy the regular systematics. So let us start you up here. Bon appetit. And a little bit of click on that. Remember, I include links to all the books and account. And thank you again, DM, for being on my patronage list there. It makes a difference every month to be able to squeak along on there in the same way the book royalties make a difference. And then, of course, my big source of income is still Social Security, though. And remember, you never see commercials in this show, ever. Arguably because I'm so far down the food chain that I don't have any snowball's chance in hell of being monetized. But I find it all, oh gosh, it's so weird when you tune into Apologia show, for example, and you get a commercial stuck in there for Epoch Times or for William Lane Craig and various ones that are occurring, and that they're philosophical positions that are diametrically opposed to the material that's being presented in the video that you're trying to watch. And that shows you that kind of all pervasiveness of these big bunches of people who can afford to dump commercials onto the field and make use of social media that way. I'm way below that mark. And I do not believe in the idea of that sort of advertisement stuff anyway. I want to see a show that is just about what it is, and if it's discussing material that has material you can link to, then there should be jolly well linkages to it. And when I watch a video where they aren't providing accessibility for stuff, you can do it in a variety of ways. I put it in direct links into the material. In other cases, at least if they show stuff on the screen that you can follow up on, that helps. Although if it's stuff that's you can be a little bit broader that way because they aren't necessarily open access stuff, but it's stuff that the person doing the video has been able to access, and there's ways around that. Another approach that, like Nick Zentner does at his college level stuff on his geology material, he has a website where all of the material that they're discussing are available open access as PDFs that you can download. And so it's accessible that way. So depending upon the venue you have and what kind of websites you're operating and all that, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it. But the primary rule is sources, damn it, because you want the viewer to be able to follow up anything you say so that you don't have to take my word for it. I don't want you to take my word for it. If you're at the stage of taking my word for it, you're not getting the drift. This is not what we're supposed to be doing. That at most, I'm trying to be a springboard and to convey my own science interest and my enthusiasm, all the rest. People don't really pay attention to commercials if they can help it. Oh, yeah. When I'm seeing these things, I'm just waiting for the blurb to end, and I then click back to the video. So it's not that fast. But there will be some people who might not recognize that and traipse off on a different direction in that regard. So, yeah, we'll see. What's happening. And then a little political aside, apparently Donald Trump is still grumping at his ongoing trial, all that, and they're swearing they're actually into the trial stage. Oh, I'm sure he's just fuming. And the one interesting bit that I'll be looking forward to see if it happens or not is that Trump declares how he really wants to testify in there and tell his side of it. But given his track record in that pronouncements, the odds are, therefore, he will not be testifying at that. His lawyers don't want him to get on the stand because they can be cross-examined, and then that increases the possibility that he'll go into ramble mode or lose his temper or drivel and not answer things appropriately or whatever. So it's a really funky little operation to see what's going on this end of it. And our political life is all in flux, as I discussed in a previous episode. So anyway, we're slogging along here bit by bit, item by item. Watch out for your wooden penguins. I never trust them. And if you are in a state of where there's any peril to your life or circumstances in terms of bad weather or whatever, hunker down and weather it out. And we will see you next week, hopefully at our regular time, all depending, because I don't know what was the problem with Restream, but this thing, it would just barely even get above 1 or 2 little blips, and it wasn't due to the fact my internet connection. It was at 4G high speed, and so there was no problem from my end. It was just something going on. Maybe too many people were doing stuff on Restream. So anyway, yeah, no sane man would want to testify at his own trial, but no one is necessarily thinking that Donald Trump is sane. So there we go. Anyway, everybody stay safe, and we will